They were God's richest soldiers, bankers with swords, monks in chainmail, feared by kings and welcomed by popes. Imagine joining a brotherhood so powerful, your very name opened doors, and so feared it could also seal your fate. Now imagine this. It's dawn in the Holy Land. The first light turns the harbour of Acre to gold. White flags with red crosses snap in the breeze above the tall stone walls. In the courtyard, armoured knights clash with wooden swords while young squires walk proud war horses to the stables. Inside the great hall, the smell of roasting lamb and fresh bread mixes with the sweet smoke of chapel incense. On the long table, silver cups shine beside letters sealed with the Pope's mark. You're not a king, you're not a prince, yet everywhere you walk, men bow their heads. Because you wear the white mantle with the red cross. You're a Knight Templar, God's richest soldier. Sure, everyone remembers how the Templars died, betrayed, tortured, burned at the stake. But here's what they forgot. For over 150 years before that, being a Templar wasn't a curse. It was the best gig in the medieval world, protected by the Pope, respected by kings, paid in gold, in land, in absolute immunity. You were part holy warrior, part international banker, and part medieval celebrity. Prayer, power, profit. Or as one modern historian might put it, the medieval startup bro, with a sword. Actually, the myth paints Templars as half-starved monks in rusty armour, trudging off to die in the sand for some hopeless cause. Quiet, humble, miserable. But the reality? Templars were more like the elite commandos of the medieval world, except their pay was enormous, their equipment was the envy of kings, and their privileges made the nobility grind their teeth. Forget the idea of sleeping in a damp stone cell, living off thin soup and bread crusts. Templars ate like they were on a royal hunting trip. Meat 3 times a week, fresh bread, fine cheese, good wine. In a world where most people's big meal was a turnip stew, that was pure luxury. Of course, luxury like that also puts a target on your back. Not everyone saw the Red Cross as a blessing. Forget answering to some grumpy local baron with a short temper and a big stick. And forget rattling a tin cup for donations, because Templars were loaded. Not a comfortable type of rich, more like owning a private yacht rich. They didn't just guard treasure, they were the treasure. They ran an international banking system centuries before the word bank even meant anything. If a noble needed to move gold from France to Jerusalem, he went to the Templars. They were PayPal, Brink Security, and the Swiss banks of their day, all in one. Yes, you had to take vows. Poverty, chastity, obedience. But poverty didn't mean sleeping in the mud. It meant you personally owned nothing. But the Order owned everything you could dream of. The finest armour, the fastest horses, the safest fortresses. And that white mantle with the red cross. It was more than a uniform. It was a golden ticket. In the street, people stepped aside for you. Merchants gave you gifts. Enemies thought twice before starting trouble. In an age when Europe was suspicious, violent, and dirt poor, being a Templar was like having VIP access to the whole known world. They called themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, a long name for just 9 knights. It was 1119 in Jerusalem, and these men claimed their mission was simple: protect Christian pilgrims making the dangerous journey from the coast to the Holy City. That road was no gentle countryside stroll. Bandits, raiders, and worse lurked behind every hill. Travelling unarmed was an invitation to get robbed, or worse. But here's the thing. Guard duty was just the opening act. The real magic trick was branding. Now, let's imagine this scenario. 9 men, armoured head to toe, cloaks as white as freshly fallen snow, each marked with a blazing red cross. They didn't just ride into battle, they rode in like they'd descended from the pages of the Bible. In an age where symbols were everything, this one screamed, "We are God's chosen." And it worked. Kings saw them as holy muscle on demand. Nobles saw them as a shortcut to heaven. fund the Templars, and maybe God overlooks those little moral missteps. Pilgrims, they finally felt safe on the road. And the Pope, he adored the idea. These knights answered to no king, no kingdom, only to him. Then came the donations we talked about. Gold, land, livestock, whole castles. Not begged for, but handed over like love letters from the faithful. Every new stronghold turned into a money machine, collecting rent, farming land, taxing trade routes. Take Hugh de Payns, one of the order's founders. He didn't just dine with kings. Kings rewrote laws to protect him. When he visited England, entire towns turned into processions. Merchants threw open their stores, eager to claim they'd served a Templar. By the time he left, the gifts were so extravagant they had to be packed in multiple convoys, each guarded like a royal treasury. The Templars were building more than a military order. They were building a medieval empire. And by the mid-1200s, their reach was staggering. They were warriors, yes, but also landlords, bankers, and trusted diplomats. And that Red Cross? It had become one of the most recognised symbols in the medieval world, from the streets of London to the gates of Jerusalem. It wasn't just a cross, it was the medieval version of a logo, a brand so powerful it sold faith better than any sermon, and power better than any sword. Kings envied it, popes used it as leverage, and rivals plotted to tear it down. Being a Templar was part monk, part soldier, and part VIP club member. So what's the gear? Your armour was the best money could buy. Chainmail hauberks, iron helms, polished shields. Your warhorse wasn't just a horse, it was a trained medieval tank, worth more than most villagers would see in their lifetime. And food? Sure, you kept your religious rules, but compared to other orders, the Templar diet was generous. Wine, bread, meat, fish, olive oil. Not exactly fasting in a desert cave. Of course, those perks could backfire. A silk-lined cloak in the Levant wasn't just comfortable. It was a neon sign for desert raiders. The same gold-hilted sword that impressed a duke could tempt a desperate mercenary into trying his luck. In a world where men killed for a loaf of bread, wearing your net worth on your back was as dangerous as it was decadent. So what about housing? Forget damp peasant huts. You stayed in fortified commanderies, stone halls with servants, chapels, and heated kitchens. And when it came to protection, Templars had only one boss, the Pope. No king could arrest you without his blessing. No lord could tax you. You could cross borders without paying tolls. In an age when a wrong look could get you thrown in a dungeon, that kind of immunity was worth more than gold. But immunity was only as strong as the man willing to honour it. In 1307, King Philip IV of France proved just how flimsy papal shields could be. Templars awoke to the sound of boots on cobblestones, their own sovereign dragging them out in chains. Papal blessing be damned. All it took was one ruler with enough debts and enough nerve to break the rules, and that red cross became a target, not a shield. And about the Brotherhood? You were part of an elite circle. Your brothers had your back in battle, in court, and even in politics. Rival lords might fight each other, but no one wanted to be the one who picked a fight with the Pope's own soldiers. So, let's see a day in the life of a Templar Knight. It's late summer, 1270. You wake in your chamber inside the thick stone walls of the Templar castle on the coast of Cyprus. The first thing you hear is the cry of gulls circling the harbour. The air drifting through your window carries the smell of salt, baking bread, and something faintly sweet, honey perhaps from the kitchen. The sea glitters beyond the battlements, a reminder of how close you are to the edge of the known world. After morning prayers in the small, echoing chapel, the flicker of candles throwing shadows across the cross, you strap on your armour. Not because you expect an attack today, but because in your position, appearance matters. Steel and discipline speak louder than words. In the courtyard, the day is already alive. Squires are brushing down restless horses, their hooves clanging against the flagstones. A clerk from France arrives, dusty from travel, with a sealed chest of coins strapped to a mule. You take the quill, sign your mark in the ledger, and order the chest to be carried to the treasury. Gold has its own kind of power. and today you hold it in your hands. By noon, the hall smells of roasted mutton and herbs. You eat well. Tender meat, fresh figs, warm bread, and a cup of deep red wine from the vineyards outside Nicosia. While you eat, a scribe stands at the far end of the table, reading aloud letters from Paris and Acre, reports of new donations of land, whispers of unrest, and word from the Crusader front filter into the room. Each line reminds you that your reach stretches far beyond this island. Later, you ride down to the harbour. The sun beats down on the whitewashed walls, and the masts of ships sway gently in the tide. 2 Genoese merchants approach you, their hands full of promises. They want safe passage for their goods. In return, they'll pay handsomely. You listen, weigh the offer, then agree. The deal is sealed with a handshake, the murmur of a prayer, and the quiet understanding that your protection is worth more than any sword. By the time the sun sets, the castle's great hall glows with candlelight. A troubadour strums a lute, singing a low, rolling ballad. Servants weave between the long tables with pitchers of wine. You drink. You speak quietly with your men about routes, alliances, and the next move. Around you, laughter and music mix with the smell of smoke and spice. And as the night deepens, you know the truth. No one here can touch you. This isn't just service to God. This is power. This is living. Because Templars had something no other order could match: global reach. From England to Jerusalem, they operated a network of commanderies, fortresses, and safe houses. Need to move gold from Paris to Acre? You could deposit it in one Templar house, travel without a coin in your pocket, and withdraw it on the other side of the continent with a simple letter of credit. That made them indispensable to merchants, nobles, and even kings. And because they answered only to the Pope, they could refuse a king's demands without fear of punishment, unless the Pope agreed. Their neutrality also made them ideal diplomats and mediators. It wasn't just theory. In 1243, they were the only ones trusted to carry terms between warring Crusader lords without being cut down mid-ride. Because both sides knew, harm a Templar messenger and the Pope himself would come for you. When rival kingdoms needed someone trustworthy to hold a hostage, guard a treasure, or negotiate a truce, they often called the Templars. It's no wonder other knights envied them. The immunity alone made them untouchable. For a while. The Templars didn't just swing swords. They played the money game better than anyone in the Middle Ages. They turned protection into profit. Pilgrims heading to the Holy Land, merchants hauling goods across dangerous roads. The Templars would guard you for a fee. And that fee wasn't small. But that pious generosity didn't sit well with everyone. To rivals, those gold-laden gifts weren't charity. They were bribes to God. Every castle handed to the Templars was one less in a king's control, and every noble buying salvation was another reason for the powerful to sharpen their knives. Their letters of credit didn't just move gold, they moved influence. A king deep in debt to the Templars thought twice before crossing them. When you controlled the purse strings of Europe's rulers, you didn't just guard treasure, you decided who could afford to go to war. That made real estate work for them. Nobles donated castles, farms, and estates out of piety. The Templars fixed them up, leased them out, and pocketed the rent. On the outside, they looked like humble warriors of God. On the inside, they were running one of the most powerful financial networks in the medieval world. The Templars didn't get rich by accident. They knew how to turn a protection into profit, guarding pilgrims and merchants for a fee. They used their holy reputation to pull in gold from nobles chasing spiritual insurance. They perfected letters of credit centuries before banks, so you could travel light and still get your money on the other side. The public thought of them as humble warriors of God, but the truth, they were also some of the sharpest businessmen of their age. Now, imagine walking into a medieval market and watching the crowd part like you're Moses. People nod respectfully. Merchants rush to serve you. You're not just a man. You're a symbol of piety, power, and divine protection. The white mantle was not just a mere cloth. It was more like a shield. Behind it, you belonged to something bigger. An order that spanned continents, commanded armies, and had the ear of the Pope. And for over a century, the Templars truly believed they were invincible. But prestige had its limits. The moment you looked too rich or too untouchable, that's when kings sharpened the axe. All it took was one whisper of heresy, and suddenly your blessed life ended at the stake. The same halls that once echoed with feasts now rang with the clank of manacles. Even the richest soldier in Christendom couldn't outspend a king's grudge. If the Templars existed today, they'd be a mashup of special forces, a multinational bank, a religious non-profit, and a luxury travel club, all rolled into one, with global immunity and zero accountability to anyone but the top. That kind of power just doesn't exist anymore, at least not with a sword. For over 150 years, the Templars enjoyed the perfect mix of faith, fortune, and freedom. They weren't peasants toiling in the fields. They weren't mercenaries selling their swords to the highest bidder. They were God's chosen warriors, wealthy, feared, and immune to earthly authority. Of course, power makes enemies. Eventually, that immunity cracked. But for most of their history, being a Templar was as good as it got. So while history remembers their brutal downfall, you should remember their golden age. Because for a lucky century and a half, these knights didn't just serve God. Turns out the hardest part of being a Templar was stopping. Well, the Templars rose to power, and Rasputin? He rose, got poisoned, shot, and drowned. Check out our Rasputin episode to see what happens when your luck finally runs out.